We live in a world where both data and technology is abundant, but creativity is still fairly low. Humans are becoming more like bots, and bots are becoming more like humans. And you really have to lean into your humanity based on what I've seen in the market in the last 2 years, building a go-to-market tech-enabled services company. I just had this epiphany in that moment that go-to-market engineers would be obsolete for SDRs.
The Next Gen Sales Leaders Podcast. Coffees for Closers.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Next Gen Sales Leader Podcast. My name is Benjamin Reed. I'm here with Richard Purcell, who is the founder of Moxie GTM. He is an expert who's been in the GTM space for over a decade, and he has a contrarian take that GTM engineers will die before SDRs and that the GTM tech space is fundamentally unwinnable. Welcome to the show.
Hey, man, nice to meet you. Glad to be here.
You too. So let's jump right into the deep end. So when you say GTM engineers will die before SDRs, what is the backstory there? What are you thinking of when you say that?
Yeah, I've come to this point of view. Really, it started out as satire because I was on another podcast where they were telling me what is my spiciest take on go-to-market. And I just had this epiphany in that moment that go-to-market engineers would be obsolete for SDRs. But as I said it, the reasoning behind it started to come to fruition. And then as I started thinking about it more, I just found like anecdotes and data to back up my point of view. And the core thesis is based on two macro problems on each side of the equation when you think about the buyer and the seller. Because on the seller side, the person building the product, they have not built a product that closes the gaps in workflows and really hinders enablement on the buyer side. And then on the buyer side, they're also not able to execute because of enablement issues. And to really close these gaps in enablement on both sides of the equation, you have to hire a specialist. And that person is called a go-to-market engineer. But then as I started to look at the evolution of tech and also the evolution of roles because of tech, I realized that go-to-market engineers are going to become obsolete before SDRs because we're moving into a world where you can have a conversation with your data. They don't need a specialist. And all these tools that are very complex to figure out have to be a whole lot less complex to figure out just because how we see like the vibe coding of engineers, how that will really seep into go-to-market engineering. And then when I think about how do you stand out in such oversaturated market, it's when you're actually leaning into humanity, when you're able to be more human. So then I thought, okay, well, which role in the go-to-market team is actually being the most human? And it's really the SDR. So that's why I think SDRs will outlast go-to-market engineers.
So it's your take that essentially these GTM engineers are there to essentially set up a technical stack, same as revenue operations, right? It's probably cut from the same cloth in that sense. And that you think that these tools and these systems are going to become to some degree obsolete as well, because there's going to be some type of transformation driven, I assume, by AI in some way, that is going to make the system both more effective, whatever that AI version of reality looks like in the future for GTM, and also simultaneously simpler from a user experience and a setup perspective. Did I capture that right? This is a break in the podcast to bring you our sponsor, RevyOps.com. That is REVYOPS.com, the #1 GTM data management platform for your GTM and revenue operations data on planet Earth. If you are using the modern stack of Clay and Instantly and Email Bison and RB2B and Trigify and all these various tools scattered across the wind, we unify all that data all into one place so you don't have any duplicates, a unified view of every single contact so you can see all the data and all the activities across all the platforms all in one place. It will allow you and your team to move faster, to get better attribution across the entire funnel, and to make a heck of a lot more money. Go to RevyOps.com, check out how you can get started today with me on a call where we'll learn about your data management problems and how we can get you guys to the next level of growth. See you guys at RevyOps.com. Go there now. It will be in the show notes as well down below. Let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, I think the two core reasons is because of, let's just call it like vibe coding, where now you can have a conversation with your data and AI is just going to make it easier to like connect workflows and have output that you need that would normally require a go-to-market engineer. And the second piece is that all roles evolve. And my thesis is that the go-to-market engineering role will become less of a full-time role and more just a skill set that any growth hire will need to have. Just like, as CRO role has evolved, now you have to like figure out how to build like dashboards and do like different types of spreadsheet. And so it's just going to be an example about how like that go-to-market engineering role will become a skill set. And it's just something that will become easier because of the evolution of technology, very similar to how, before AWS, we needed to have a system administrator, but now those roles have virtually evaporated, and now that's just part of DevOps. So that's my core thesis.
Yeah, it is interesting because like, what is everyone who's new to the podcast, you've heard me probably not talk about the GTM engineer role, but I have a pretty strong take on it, which is probably similar to yours. And I would say the question is, well, what is a GTM engineer? And I believe it was a term coined by Clay several years ago to help product market, essentially, to get people excited about using their product. And they convinced the market that building lists and enriching lists and finding signals and constantly doing AI analysis on these lists is the fundamental function of a revenue team led by the GTM engineer. And obviously using their product to do so, right? Which therefore makes them more profitable, and it seems like a pretty good marketing ploy. What I have generally believed is that you shouldn't be incessantly pulling lists and re-enriching lists and re-verifying lists, and you should pull it once, revisit it on occasion to make sure you have the full TAM. Obviously, monitor some signals, but once you have that, it's good old school marketing, right? The question is like, so what does a GTM engineer do? Like, if we're going to go deeper into this, the question for me is answered by like, well, what does any outbound team do? They come up with an ideal customer profile. They build a list of those people. They make sure that that data is good. What does good mean? It means that the emails are accurate, that they're relevant, they're for the current company they're working at. They're deliverable, meaning that they're not going to bounce. And the phone number information is relevant. And they're the right people in the first place that match the ICP. So that's kind of like stage one, ICP list. Then we get into, okay, well, copywriting. So what is the right message, right? What do we actually say to the people that we're saying stuff to? And obviously you choose your channel, whether it's, cold email or LinkedIn. And then finally you have to get your message delivered. So there's some type of, it's either LinkedIn or cold email, maybe direct mail, and cold calling. So if you think about like where the GTM engineer fits within that world, they certainly are heavily based upon the list creation. There is some element of copywriting, which is very interesting, and I don't think it fits in that role because they're not market specialists, subject matter experts, or copywriters. And then the final thing is probably more GTM focused, which is deliverability and channel setup of like the multi-touch campaigns and when do you send something? How do you actually tactically set up, say, hey, reach or instantly? So do you think I captured that definition of a GTM engineer right? Or do you think there's something else that they do?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's hard to just find a consistent job description for go-to-market engineers. Some of them make them look like they are actual engineers because they have to, know SQL. Some of them, it's just look like more like a growth hacker where they actually have to write the messaging. Sometimes I just see like people trying to create the most perfect go-to-market hire where it's a mixture of like the outbound of an SDR with the skill sets of like a sales ops person. But like fundamentally, it's just someone who connects all the systems. And most sales reps will have like multiple tabs open. So they have like LinkedIn in one tab, maybe they have, a website tracking tool, another tab, prospecting tool, another tab. And so the go-to-market engineer is really just trying to connect all those different tabs or all those different data sets. And so you think, okay, well, now if we can connect all those different tabs and data sets with just one prompt, then what is the go-to-market engineer needed for?
That's a good point. And I would agree with you. I think that the thing that people get wrong though in vibe coding, and I don't think this refutes what you're saying on the GTM engineering side. I completely agree that there is probably not a need for a tactical specialist that does that. I think it is a part of a larger function and feature.
Yeah, it's a skill set. Yeah.
a skill set, right? And I think it's frankly RevOps. I mean, like we're trying to reinvent RevOps. But
Yeah.
but I think that the deeper thing that I think everyone gets wrong on vibe coding and data management is that fundamentally AI analysis is a data capture and a data organization and a data cleanliness problem. Because the thing that makes the AI actually give good output is one, of course, good prompts and a good model. But then the next thing is how good is the data and how easily accessible is the data. And what I've seen quite a bit of is that people think that they can vibe code their way into clean, deduplicated, normalized data sets across all these tools. And the truth is that you can't easily do that, especially if you don't have access. But even if you do have access, it is not easy for AI, especially the AI of today, to analyze all these divergent data sets effectively. And just to make that like clear, I actually just did this whole post on LinkedIn called schema normalization. And the problem is it's a linguistic semantics problem, which gets into database engineering, which is what do you do if you have a column in a database? So anybody listening, if we're talking about a Postgres database, which everyone it's talking about Supabase now, obviously my software RevOps is also Postgres for LOADB, but it's a Postgres database, and so it's a structured database which has columns and rows. And so if you have the head of a column, everyone sees it in Clay and Google Sheets, whatever. It's the name of the column. That's so a bunch of columns is a schema, and it's for one table in one part of a domain model. And the problem that everyone gets wrong is just because you have one column named animal doesn't mean that in, say, HubSpot, it's called animal. And doesn't mean in instantly it's called animal. And the problem is that if they're called something completely different, like imagine it as role and imagine it as title, or imagine it as function. And there's three different names for title, essentially, right? Across multiple systems. And the AI doesn't understand that they're related or confuses that they are related and they might not be related. Then you end up with analysis, workflow, optimization, dashboards that are frankly inaccurate. So the actual starting point of any good vibe coding experience is actually data management, data engineering, data normalization, what they call the golden schema. This goes back 30 years. So I don't know if I have any question off of that, but I'm curious if that's true. Well, one, do you think that's true? And number two is, how do you see the engineer, the data engineer, the GTM engineer, not engineers, fit into that world?
Yeah. Well, I think even calling him a go-to-market engineer was a misnomer. And I think maybe a better way to define this person would have been like a go-to-market architect, because they're really just trying to like connect different things and build workflows. But to your point, yes, it's all about the data accuracy and the data quality, because people have this issue with the Lovables of the world where they're like build something where the front end UX looks great, but then the back end is crap because the data isn't connecting in the right way. And the way that you solve for this in this use case is getting the first party data right, like in the CRM, and that's a RevOps problem. Getting the data right, third-party data, I think that's an easier problem to solve. And one way that we're solving for it is the Swarms API, because what they've done is they've just consolidated, the traditional tech stack when it comes to job tracking, relationship mapping, data enrichment, and LinkedIn engagement. And so they're like connecting all these different systems. They're consolidating it into one API. And then they've integrated with the Claude with their MCP. So now you're just able to have a conversation in Claude. And, now that it doesn't take any specialists to even do that. And I've been playing around with Claude for the last couple of weeks, like with this MCP. And it's just fascinating what you're able to come up with, where like before I tested out this MCP in Claude, I would have to work with one of our virtual assistants for a few hours, connect with these different systems, and to get one lead list out to a client, it might take like 2 or 3 hours. And then you have to think about the cost of all those different tools, the cost of my time, the cost of the VA's time. And in about 3 minutes with one prompt, this MCP with Claude was able to do the exact same output. And I actually manually checked every single lead. And granted, it was like a small number of leads, maybe only like 30, because it was like for a micro campaign. It was all accurate data. And it just shows you like what's really possible. And what's also pretty fascinating about how quickly technology is evolving is when I first had this epiphany about go-to-market engineers being obsolete, uh, like today is like the 25th of November. I probably had this epiphany like the first week of October. So that's only like 7 weeks ago. And since I had this epiphany, it's crazy how all these founders have been inbounding me and sharing about how they're building the future of go-to-market exactly with my hypothesis. And then I also discovered this Claude MCP. So I'm like, man, if I've just discovered this and seen the evolution in 7 weeks, like what's going to happen 7 weeks from now? And at first, I was predicting that go-to-market engineers would be obsolete in about 18 months. Like that actually may be too long term. I mean, it might even be sooner. And a lot of people will, try to disagree with me on this hypothesis, but most of the time in my comments, it's a lot of like ad hominems or like emotional reaction, but no one has been able to give me the data that would be a counterfactual to this narrative. And one of the big things people say is like, oh, well, look at all these go-to-market engineers, the job descriptions are rising, more people are being hired. And to me, that's just an indication of how broken the market is and how like companies like Clay have created what I call complexity arbitrage, where they've created a problem to sell the solution. And just like Salesforce, who had the same exact play, Salesforce would make their CRM so complex, and we used to think complexity meant sophistication. And back 20 years ago, this was actually a viable go-to-market strategy because it was very hard to find a alternative CRM that could do what you do. But now there's like at least 10 plus other Clay-like competitors. And because of this vibe coding ability, you can now create something that's 70, 80% of the way there without a go-to-market engineer. And so I just don't see how this role can really, keep up with the evolution of technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tactically speaking, I think you're right in terms of like pushing buttons, writing in, doing the queries, pulling the data, normalizing it, and all that kind of stuff. I think you're 100% spot on. I think if it is a role in spirit that persists, I think it's going to be strategic in nature. And what I mean by that, and this might not be long-lived either. I mean, depending upon how good the AI is at analyzing everything. But the thing that I realized is as a marketer and as an entrepreneur, somebody who's failed a lot, but also has had a couple wins, I will say that the hardest thing to do in any GTM strategy is not tactical. Like what buttons to push or what lists to pull or exactly how do you clean this up or do this or that is not really difficult. Even the really complicated like deduplication, CRM cleanup stuff that people talk about, it's all doable and solvable with some variation of what we're describing, right? Whether it's an MCP, Claude thingamajig, or whether it's some other, more old school Python script matched with some good old school VLOOKUPs and CSVs. I think that the thing that the market has been completely not talking about, which is actually the most important thing, is just how do you do good marketing, right? It's like we've gotten so overwhelmed with all of these systems and this, the AI and how do we like hack this together and automate everything. And if I'm being frank, like all of my major wins are coming through good old school fashion cold calls and just really well-written one-to-one cold LinkedIn DMs. I mean, that's like, yeah. And it's like, everyone here is like freaking out. And look, I own a software that integrates all of those tools. So I'm like, I also believe that there is a world that has to be solved there. But that being said, I still think people are missing the bigger picture here, which is like, if you ever read, I always bring up Breakthrough Advertising because I just think he just did such a good job of explaining like, what is a market? And like what a market is, and everyone, I bet you if you ask any GTM engineer on planet Earth, what is a market, you'll come up with 1,000 different answers. And I bet you if you ask a marketer, what is a market, people will argue 5,000 different things. What he argues, and I'm not saying he's right, but what he argues, Eugene Schwartz, is that a market is where a personal desire of an individual reaches a scale large enough across many individuals to justify the cost of marketing and product development to get a return on investment to sell to that group of people. That's when a market develops. Essentially is when you or I, let's say we have the desire of being in shape, right? When enough of us to get together and go, wow, I really want that thing, or I need to solve this problem. And then that justifies somebody building something to sell it to make a profit on it. That's what a market is. And the truth is that when you think about that, it's like, okay, well then if that is true, the number one role of a marketer is to identify those markets, understand the nuances of those markets, understand the desire and problem at play, and then come up with great messaging that perfectly reflects the cutting edge trend of what people desire in their hearts and their minds. Nobody talks about that. It's like such a basic fundamental thing. And everyone's sitting here with like AI written copy, and they just hope that the AI copy is going to know some niche, nuanced, up to date trend psychographic about a group of people that couldn't possibly be knowable unless you are actively living the day to day, exploring and researching these people, which is what's required for great marketing. But all the GTM experts don't do that. They rely on AI written crap that because they think AI or copywriting is the solution, but actually great research is. So that's my perspective, is I think GTM engineers, if they truly survive as a title, are going to have to become just really great marketers. And maybe they lead the technical side to make sure the AI, human in the loop, is working. But they have to be the one tweaking and going, no, actually, I think there's this extra little spice of understanding of the trend over here, and feed that into the model and work with it. That's the way I see GTM engineering going. What do you think?
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think the way to differentiate in today's market is with creativity and enablement. And give you an example on the enablement part is that a go-to-market engineer or anyone on the go-to-market team can identify and create the most perfect lead ever. But if there's not a process to take action on that lead and not just turn it into a meeting, but then also nurture them along the way up until close one, like that's the way you stand out. Because I think in the 2.5 years that I've been running a go-to-market agency, the enablement issue on the client side is the number one issue why clients churn, because we can do everything on that we can to create the most perfect lead, the most perfect messaging. But if it just sits in a rep's outreach or sales loft, or maybe they do the wrong thing, or maybe their email infrastructure isn't set up, so they have low deliverability, like that's like a huge enablement issue, regardless how good and high quality your lead is. And then on the creativity piece, I think it's more important than ever to think from first principles. And we live in a world where both data and technology is abundant, but creativity is still fairly low. And we're in this world where humans are becoming more like bots and bots are becoming more like humans. And you really have to lean into your humanity, but powered by AI, because I think tools like Claude and ChatGPT are great at like accelerating your creativity. But I tell founders and go-to-market leaders all the time is that first think about like the most perfect workflow, the most perfect person to reach out to, and then work backwards to create the process, and then work backwards and say, now that we have the process, what's the right tech? And so that's where I think, to your point, I think it's just like creativity and enablement. But I'm not even sure that like a marketer's job, I could envision a world where like the founder, is powered by tools and AI to actually come up with it. And we have a great example of this where, the founder can tell us like a whole paragraph about who their high value customers are. We could just copy and paste that into Claude that's connected to the Swarm, and very quickly get a curated list of people who like match that exact criteria. And that could be like 10 or 20 different data points. And yes, the lead list may only be 10 or 20 people, but that's a small curated audience where a human being can actually reach out and do like one-to-one engagement. So it's just an example of how I think, how you win in this market with creativity and enablement.
Yeah, totally. I think that for anybody who is running these motions, I always tell people throw out all of it. Like just get back to especially if you are a early time founder. And I think what happens quite often is that people see a trend like we're seeing right now, which is every LinkedIn influencer in the GTM space is just posting the same five stupid tools over and over and over with different diagrams. And the reason they've done that is because there's certain influencers that got successful with that strategy, Cold IQ, others in the space. And it's just like, it's a perfect example of both human ignorance, but also human dynamics at play, which is people will follow. They're not getting, I know these people are not getting results from them. because I'm in all the LinkedIn engagement groups. I'm probably the most active LinkedIn engagement group member across like 5 of these different pods. And I know because I see my post frequency. So I'm deep in it. I look at all these other posts and I ask people, I'm like, what kind of return on investment are you getting with these posts? You're putting out like all these hot takes on these softwares. They're like, nothing. And I'm like, okay, then why are you doing it? I don't know. It's just going to take some time. And my response is, okay, yes, you're right. It does take some time with organic, but if you're getting absolutely 0 results from it, then why the hell do you keep doing it? Well, that just seems like that's the thing to do. And so I think what's happening in this market, which is very ironic because we're supposed to be the engineers of the market, not the like robots that are being engineered, but like most GTM engineers are engineered robots to just be kind of thought leaders for Clay. I mean, that's effectively what's happened. And that's like the harsh reality. Nobody wants to hear that, but nobody is thinking freely. Nobody is, like, it is a very small handful groups of people, and I would put you in this handful, that are actually going like, is this really the right way? Is this really what's working? And I think you said it well, what you said, like arbitraging complexity. And I think you're right. It is, I think that we've overcomplicated the things that don't need to be complicated, and we've completely diminished the things that are complicated. We've diminished the complexity of psychographics and human analysis and human creativity and human experience. We've completely put that into this, we can just copyright our way out of it with a prompt. And so everybody, I go into these threads on all these Clay groups and these GTM communities, and everyone's talking about how to prompt better because they're hoping that the prompt will help somehow extract some intuition and insight about how to message more clearly. And my response is, you're wildly undervaluing how complex writing good copy is, one. And on the other side, you are wildly overvaluing how important it is to slice and dice and re-verify and triple enrich and do all this bullshit. And it's like, just to get like one really good piece of copy and just to get really great ads, it has sometimes taken me up to 6 to 12 months of iterative approaches to copywriting in market exploration. It's what I call the 1,000 conversations to land on the messaging and the positioning I need to be in. And so then you have like some guy who's just learned Clay and he's like sitting there prompting something because he found a prompt in some Reddit thread. And he thinks that's going to then like generate a result. And the problem is we're in this crazed market where all of these poor, unsuspecting owners are hearing about Clay and just want to be a part of this next gold rush. And they're just being sold bullshit by like all these new fly-by-night GTM agencies, because there are great ones. I can count on my hands the great ones that I know of. The other 5,000 that I've heard of and I've come across are mediocre at best or just starting up. And there's no shame in that, but they are not experts. And so I'm curious, do you see this crazy world that I see, or am I off on just a rant? Feel free to disagree.
Yeah, I think you're onto something in terms of trying to solve a pipeline problem by adding more complexity. Because when most people have a pipeline problem, they really have a process problem. And 2 years ago, I wrote about how complexity meant your go-to-market team is too big. And a lot of companies would think, okay, well, if one AE equals $1 million in ARR, if I just hire 10 AEs, that's $10 million in AR, and there I go with my Series B. When in actuality, it was more like a process issue and enablement, and you could probably, had just as much productivity and revenue, which is a much smaller team. And today, the same logic is moved from people to make things more complex to tech stack to make things more complex. And like one of the most nauseating LinkedIn posts I see frequently from agencies is when they post their like 47-step workflow of like connecting all these different things. And once again, it's complexity arbitrage because you're going to hire them, they're going to create all this complexity, then you're going to be tied to them, and you can't like move off of them because then you lose the person who built the thing. And so now, like the way to reduce the complexity from a tech stack standpoint is what I'm talking about today, about like consolidating the solution, having a conversation with your data, no specialist. So that's how I see it.
The one point that I feel like I have a slightly different take than you is on the idea that all the data should live in the CRM. Now, maybe you don't believe that. So I heard you say something earlier that you got to get your CRM in order and you got to get the data in there. Now, I think that there's truth to that. I'm curious, what do you believe there was a role of, obviously, anybody who knows me, RevOps, I have a strong bias. So I'm asking a question with a strong bias. I want to put that out there, but I will back up my bias in a second. I want to know your perspective. Do you think all data belongs in the CRM? Obviously, you know my answer.
No, I don't. And like one example of this is, let's say you're doing outbound campaigns and you're generating leads. I think those leads should sit in some kind of prospecting tool. Our preference is LGM. And then when those leads convert to meetings or positive replies, like that would go into your CRM. I don't think you should fill your CRM with a bunch of people where there's not a real purpose behind the reason behind it. And also, I don't think you should fill every contact, every company with like every piece of metadata as possible. I mean, the way that we try to think about it is like, again, going back to the creativity standpoint is how would you define your high value customers and get like really specific on criteria and then say, okay, why are they our high value customers, and get really specific on those key moments that matter that trigger them to be high value customers, and then just optimize your entire data orchestration and your CRM just to those data points and just to those milestones.
So I'm going to give you my take, and I'm curious. I'm not saying this as a point of certainty. I'm saying this as a point of belief that could be wrong. So I want you to challenge me if you think there's a place to challenge. So there's a couple of things that I'm seeing in the CRM market, and I'm not just saying this lightly. I love CRMs. For anybody who thinks I hate CRMs, I have been a Salesforce admin, a HubSpot admin. I have built software on almost all of the tools you can think of, from Go High Level, Pipedrive, Copper, Monday, you name it. I've probably done it, and I unfortunately know all about them. So that being said, one thing that I'm seeing is that I feel like we are moving into a world where the CRM will be obsolete. And that's my big claim. I think Salesforce and a HubSpot will be shells of themselves in 10 years. That's what I believe. Now, it's contrarian. I could look like an idiot. Clip this 10 years from now. But this is my big take. I think that, to your point, I think the user experience dramatically simplifies down to more like a Google-like, ChatGPT-like experience. I think in addition to that, I think what actually matters is processing speed and power, as well as the ability to handle large volumes of data and also analysis. To do that, the current CRMs are not built in what I mean by built. I mean, technically, they are not using the right technology stacks. From a domain model, they're not using optimal domain models, which is how they structure their databases. From a outside of just like the core technology DevOps environment that they're operating in, their current business models do not facilitate the type of API rate limits that are required to move data in and out of these tools. I don't think they could technically do it either way, but I don't think they would want the data to be moved in and out as fast as we would need. And they certainly aren't set up for like large multivariant query analysis, because most of them do not back up into like what you would call like a columnar data store, like a BigQuery, Redshift, Snowflake type of environment. So I guess my point is that I think that in a world of AI, again, this could be completely wrong, and I could look like an idiot 5 years from now, but in a world of AI, I think there's some things that are true. You need to be able to handle petabytes of data. You need to be able to analyze that data at scale. And you need to be able to move the data around quickly and effectively without rate limits, without errors and retries and a bunch of bullshit. You basically just need wide open APIs. And I think all the current CRMs don't do that effectively, which caused them to be just a shitty solution for the world we're entering. And I think we're in this weird in-between where they are the leaders, but I feel like I see them as like the blockbusters in 1995 that are about to go out of business. So I'm curious, do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you think?
Where I think we're aligned is what I keep bringing up around consolidation. And part of that is how it's going to be a huge red flag for any SaaS company that requires a new login or a new tab. And I see this world where, I know there's, I think it's Perplexity that just built this, this browser where it starts with just like a single prompt, and then you type in what you want, and it takes you where you want on the internet, and like gets you the data that you need. And I could see the same thing when it comes to someone's go-to-market stack, where it's just a single UX, kind of looks like a Claude or a ChatGPT interface. You type in what you want, and then all of a sudden just pulls the data that you need, and then all of a sudden it's just like right there for you. I think we're going to be gone into the world where you have to like click into HubSpot and pull up the right dashboards or reports. Again, it's going to be just a conversation with your data. So that's where I think we're aligned, where it's like going to be consolidation and just having a conversation with your data in a single UX.
Do you agree that the big CRMs are in trouble, or do you think they're going to survive and pivot?
I think all SaaS is in trouble unless they're vertical SaaS, and that includes CRMs. I just think that you just need to find a way to like move from the experience that you have to like log into a CRM, click around what you want, and instead just like have the conversation with the data. And maybe CRM will still exist, but again, it'll be kind of like part of the infrastructure and not a new login or new workflow.
I got you. Yeah, it's going to be so interesting to see how this all evolves, because I do feel like, just like, when, what's it called? Oracle came out, in the late 90s, when they made this whole big claim about the way databases should work. We're in a similar scenario where there just might be a rethinking of CRUD applications altogether. And the thing is, I don't see, unless there's some other big breakthrough in AI that I have not yet fully grasped, which is entirely possible, I still don't see how they get away from the standard physics of like a Postgres environment matched with a columnar database and maybe some like Redis caching layer. I maybe they'll do it differently. And maybe the AI will get so good that if you give it like kind of like you're saying in the swarm idea, which is like some type of mapping key that allows it to like just perfectly map everything together, it still needs to store the data somewhere. So I guess I don't know. It's an interesting technical problem, and certainly we're trying to solve that at ReviOps. But like I was just on a call with a potential investor when they were asking me like where this is going, and I'm like, who the hell knows? I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just making shit up right now, guys. Like, this is the best answer I got today, and we'll probably wake up to your point like in 7 weeks from now and be like, well, what the fuck just happened? So who knows?
Well, to that point, how do you introduce me? Based on what I've seen in the market in the last 2 years, building a go-to-market tech-enabled services company, I come to the point of view that go-to-market tech space is unwinnable, and I've been getting a lot of validation from VCs who look at the space, and even founders who both have successful and unsuccessful businesses. So, curious on your take on that. If like you think go-to-market tech
what do you
winnable.
define as
winnable? It's not growing, but I just mean what I mean winnable is like a reasonable exit for the founder of a go-to-market tech company.
Define a reasonable exit.
I would say 10x multiple, getting the business to, let's say, like $10 million in revenue at least, low churn. Because as I talk to founders, like two founders who are at the Series A phase in go-to-market tech, they had really nice growth, but they have high churn, but it's still not the 3x growth that most VCs are looking for. And both of these founders say they're going to have a hard time raising Series B, but they don't think that they can even get to that kind of growth based on the saturation of the market and how fickle the customers are.
Yeah, I think the answer is maybe, and it depends. And I think, look, who knows what's going to happen in the next 2 years? I would say right now that take is refutable because there's many examples of people that are getting to $10 million, even in the last 6 to 12 months. Example, I had do you know Niels by any chance? The perspective guy. He's the guy who like is this blonde kind of like younger guy, probably in early 20s, but he has this kind of hipster kind of like vibe. But he's selling basically the new version of ClickFunnels. It's called Perspective.
Mm-hmm.
They came out of Germany, so a podcast with him is going live on Wednesday. But they bootstrapped to $10 million ARR in the last 4 years, and they did most of their growth in the last 12 months, completely bootstrapped. And it's just basically a ripoff of ClickFunnels, just made for the more modern kind of mobile stack. But so that's like one example where they're crushing and they're growing rapidly. So now, whether that continues into the next 2 years, I think is really the more interesting question, because I think you could argue, well, okay, that was over the last 4 years, but now we're really at this inflection point and things are changing. But I also think it depends upon like, well, what is the ultimate goal? And there's this whole split right now between venture capitalism and bootstrapping. And so, everyone knows RB2B, Adam Robinson. He's the guy who absolutely loves the bootstrapping world. And then you have guys like the microconf guys, and I think they have something called Tiny, a little investment firm, and they're all about the bootstrapping. So that crowd certainly would argue against you because there's just many counterexamples to that point. And their goal isn't a 10x multiple. Their goal is to build a cash flowing, sustainable business that works year over year. Now, the argument that maybe venture capital is going to be going through a kind of a come to Jesus when it comes to SaaS specific that isn't AI enabled, that's probably a good argument. But that's, I would say, less because of the market and more because of investors' appetite. So I would say from a RevOps perspective, our experience has been very standard growth so far in our space, where very standard GTM experience for early stage SaaS, some, a lot of customer discovery, a lot of learning, and playing with price points. But, we've gotten to a pretty good MRR for a company that's only been around for a year. And now it's not $10 million. And that would be nice. But I think that nobody gets to $10 million unless you're like Lovable or some crazy application like that. So I don't know. I guess generally speaking, I would argue against your point on this. But I like I said, I could see a wildly different reality in 12 months. And especially if some of these AIs get much, much better and their ability to navigate the login thing like you're describing, like how do they get access to systems, if that becomes a lot more turnkey and they can deal with this normalization issue, I think SaaS could be toast. So I can take both sides of the argument. I don't know if that landed.
Well, yeah, I guess something I've heard you say is around like cash flow positive and sustainable and bootstrap. But I've even seen examples of these bootstrapped companies where I would argue they're not sustainable. And even using RBB as an example, because Adam Robinson is very transparent about his churn numbers. Sure, and if you look at his churn numbers month to month, this means that every 12 months, he has an entire new customer base. And I don't find that to be sustainable. I wouldn't want to be in that business. I'm sure he's fine with it. I'm sure he does fairly well, but I wouldn't call that sustainable. And another example is that if you are profitable and bootstrapped, you think you're building a sustainable business, but what's going to happen is a founder is going to see how well you're doing in that space. They're going to raise some VC money. They're going to out-innovate you on products. They're going to make you not move as fast on the go-to-market side. So then something that used to be minimal churn for you as a bootstrap founder is going to be very high churn, and then you're going to get outpacing your market. So that's kind of how I see like the market right now. And yes, you've given examples of people who had decent exits, but I'm talking about like today and like 2 years from now, when I just look at the evolution of technology as well as how the market's going to become even more saturated because of how easy it is to build product. I just find that it's going to be really hard to like build a business with like a reasonable exit. And I'm not saying that go-to-market tech doesn't have momentum. I'm not saying it's not growing. I'm just saying it's not winnable, and there's a difference there.
Yeah, I think that there's probably going to be an acceleration of the timelines. I think you're right, as I think we're going to see a faster kind of turnover, which is like you scale up faster, you might exit faster. And maybe it's true. Maybe it's like we're seeing a fundamental change in the longevity of any given project. Or maybe no projects at all if the AI is good enough. I mean, maybe like, God like AI is coming for us all, and we will just be sitting here playing, racquetball, all day long. But yeah, I would say that I actually have a relatively contrarian take on AI. And I believe that so let me give you an example. So in college, I wrote a thesis right around the containment theory in U.S. foreign policy. It was called the perception of threat was the name of the thesis. And the idea was I went into the archives in the State Department and I actually read original files from the CIA and from the State Department on how people were talking about their perception of communism in Guatemala and all these various countries across from like 1954 in Guatemala with this guy named Jacobo Arbenz, and all the way through 1976 with Allende in Chile. I think it was Allende. It's been a while since I've wrote the paper. And then there was, some other countries worth looking at. And the interesting thing was the definition of a communist was the same across 20 years, from 1954 to 1976. But the perception of whether an actual real life situation through that lens was in fact communism or not, which determined whether the United States would take action and intervene covertly in a regime, was completely wildly different. It was like these different people across time completely judged reality differently. And I guess I'm saying that because when we look at like what's happening with AI right now, I have this very acute sense of human distortion is occurring. And it seems like we are on a hype train right now that may in fact be true, but it may also not be true. And I would not be shocked if it's not. And so my personal experience with AI so far has been that it hallucinates wildly. And yes, things have changed in the last several weeks to make it better, but it still hallucinates wildly. It's prone to error. It requires constant iteration and looking into and checking and fact checking and rechecking. And it still seems to be lacking. Now, the counter argument is, well, exponential growth, it's going to be so much better than you could imagine in 12 months from now, and fuck you. So that's basically like the counter argument. And touche, maybe that's the case. It would not shock me if that did not happen. It would also not shock me that the capabilities of AI, just like the capabilities of Lovable or any of these other tools, are just basically they hit some level of a ceiling for a plateau period of say 5 to 10 years before some fundamental breakthrough occurs. And we've been sold a bag of tricks that looks amazing. It's like a beautifully wrapped present that's glowing under the Christmas tree, and we just can't wait to unwrap it. But you unwrap it and it's like an empty Amazon box, and it's like, that's kind of how AI feels to me at the moment. Now, like I said, I could be wrong. I'm blown away every single day by some new AI thing that comes out. I just still I don't think the hype matches with the reality at the moment. And I could imagine where 4 to 5 years from now, SaaS is churning along just like it used to. People have kind of gotten over the AI craze. Remember when we used to think AI was taking over the world? I could also imagine a world where we're all dead. So it's like, I'm not sitting here as like a diehard, like I'm open to it all, baby. You know what I mean? So you obviously lean more towards the aggressive AI future.
I'm not sure I would call it aggressive AI future. I definitely think that we're going to have severe limitations on AI that people aren't really expecting, and we may not get to super intelligence as quickly as we'd like. And I think there's two reasons why. I think number one, we're already running out of data. So we're having AI companies create fake data that even continue to build their models. And then number two, I think we're going to run out of electricity. So until we reach like nuclear fusion, I think the electricity is going to be an issue. And then I actually don't think OpenAI will be the winner in AI. And I think because if you look at how long it took them to go from GPT-4 to GPT-5, it was 2 years. And it was really just a big dud. And it's because they no longer have the best engineers. They don't own the data. They don't own the infrastructure. And they only own the algorithms and the distribution. And so I think Google has a better chance of winning the AI race because of all those things that OpenAI doesn't have.
Yeah. Have you seen the new documentary on YouTube? Or it was, I don't know who wrote it, but it was like a paper called like AI 2027 or something like that. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
So basically, like you can go on YouTube and watch it, but for anybody listening, this is how it goes. Basically, like there's this, in the next 12 to 18 months, there's going to be a rapid succession of AI releases across multiple different providers like AI, OpenAI, Gemini, etc., DeepSeek. They're all going to be fighting with each other. And at some point, there's essentially the public facing version, like the GPT 5.1, like, right, that we're using. And then there's going to be some internal kernel of super awesomeness that has been hidden from the public that's already live right now and is already there inside these essentially offices in a black box. And it's not clear. And then these systems are fundamentally just a step change order of magnitude better than the current version of reality that we get to see as the public. And that essentially that they're going to keep on getting better, but they're already at the state where, or in the next several months, they'll be at the state where they can start to improve themselves rapidly. And then there's going to be, with the advent of like agents, they're going to have essentially these super agents that are going to be able to do crazy ass shit. Excuse my French. So that's the best way to describe it. Because I don't think there's any other way to describe it at this point. Nobody knows what the hell's going to happen. And so then what's going to happen is it's going to become so apparent to people on the inside that they are on top of a godlike substance of some sort, that the U.S. government's going to have to intervene with one of the companies and essentially kind of commandeer, kind of like the Manhattan Project style thing, where it's like, okay, we got to be involved here. This is next level. And at that point, meanwhile, over in China, a similar thing is going to have occurred. Now, China already owns it. They're obviously, they're in control. And so what's going to happen, though, is that this is according to this prediction, is that the AIs essentially there's a couple of variations of this. One is the AIs are not controllable, and they're actually manipulating the governments to believe that they are in control. But meanwhile, they're actually communicating across the internet to take over the world, essentially. And they're just deceiving us actively to make us think that we have some type of, effect. The alternative is we have somehow seeded in some level of control and alignment, and they do have our backs and they are negotiating in good faith, both for us and between ourselves, but we are not the ones negotiating. It's actually AI in the year 2027, this time 2027, negotiating on behalf of humanity across multiple countries to work out what works. So that's kind of like the ultimate, like, AI is as good as people think it is, and it's actually much better, and it's worse. So, yeah, but if that's true, I mean, like, what are we doing here? Like, you and I are going to be out of a job. Like, what are we, I don't even know what happens if that happens. I mean, we're now kind of off the deep end in GTM, but it's like, truly, like, what the hell? There's going to be mass riots. Nobody's going to have a purpose. There might be a trade-over period of 10 to 15 years while people kind of get used to having nothing to do. We come up with games, and it's like kind of Roman gladiator shit, where we end up, in the battle dome where people are like Hunger Games killing each other. But I cannot imagine how society doesn't collapse under the weight of something like that. Do you? I mean, how could we possibly?
Well, I think something's going to happen is kind of to your point around like AI negotiating for humans is, I've already talked to founders kind of working on this, is right now you're already having AI on the seller side, and now you're also starting to have AI on the buyer side. And so because you have all these new SaaS and AI tools being sprouted up, the buyer still has just as much time as they always have, or probably less, so they can't even evaluate all those different tools or even know how to evaluate. So you're going to have like AI on the seller side and AI on the buyer side just talking to each other. Like on the buyer side, they're going to create like an RFP, then that seller side, they're going to refund the RFPs, and then they're going to make them just like negotiate all without humans. I think what's going to happen, and I see this to myself already, is I'm starting to lose context, even in my own business, because I have AI powering it so much, where like maybe I'm not listening as well into a Zoom call because I know the AI note taker is going to fill me in later, or like maybe I get a summary of an email and I don't read it thoroughly because I know AI will summarize it. And so if you put this into context with like AI on the buyer side, the seller side, figuring things out without humans, we're going to start to have like Theranos and Enron style like business meltdowns where the whole company has been run by AI, but then AI hallucinates or AI like takes over, and then that business just fails. And then, Elizabeth Holmes went to jail because of her fraud. But if you have fraud that's only being controlled by AI, who goes to jail then?
Yeah, see, this is where I have a contrarian take, is because I see that the fundamentals of building a big successful business is predicated on I love this Hormozy quote, which is, you must find the biggest constraint and allocate resources to solve for it. That's the role of the CEO. I think that's the role of any leader as any sub part of that business. And that requires deep agency, judgment, and grit on the part of the person in that role to be able to take all the little pieces of the pie and meld together like one thing that tells them what to focus on and do. And I think there are parts of a business that can be automated and streamlined. Part of the supply chain, part of the code creation, part of the process design, part of the data workflow optimization, all that kind of stuff. But the fundamental strategic elements of a business, of discerning what is a good path or a bad path, I don't think that AI has enough context to make decisions. And so the way that I look at AI is the same way I look at the human mind. I will take somebody who has deep experience over high intellect all day. I'll take somebody with high grit over high intellect all day. And the reason that I do that, now I'd like to have both, of course, but the reason I do that is because I believe context and in persevering across time, which gathers more context, is actually the most important lever. And I think the challenge is like, what do you do when AI cannot gather context? And I think the thing AI cannot do yet, which again, there's counterexample with Elon Musk and his brain chip thingamajig, but AI cannot yet discern and understand the active evolution of human thinking outside of what is written online. Now, there's a lot written online, but what's on the cutting edge, the subtle like group meetings at Clay clubs and the conversations behind closed doors with family members about how Sally sucks, that kind of stuff. That's where the trends in the markets get molded and shaped together, in my opinion. And I think that's where the next, like, if you've ever read the book, The Next Big Thing, it's about like, how do you, in a world of uncertainty, at the very cutting edge of the next inflection point for humanity, how do you know where to go? And that's the role of the CEO. That's the role of the founder. That's the Steve Jobs, Elon Musk's of the world. And that's what they're thinking of. I don't think AI can predict that. Just the same reason I don't think, people can predict anything, let alone an AI. So I just still feel like there's always going to be some fundamental human person at the core of it, because this world is a human world. Until we all become robots and we all get eaten by the AI, if there's a human being in the loop, if there's a human being who has a desire or a want, those wants and desires are not obvious and they're not necessarily intuitive, and they can be completely counterintuitive. And AI cannot possibly know what some random 8-year-old right now is envisioning and dreaming of for their life. Now, there's certain human qualities that are true. Those are like concrete kind of forces, like women want to look beautiful, men want to feel strong. It's like just true things about reality. But
I'm not touching that one.
yeah, you're right, exactly. But you get my point. It's like there are true things that are just true to human beings. It's like, I know you want to breathe oxygen, right? I know you probably want to have some food today. You probably don't like when you wake up sleeping poorly. So it's like, I can make some just intuitions about you as a human being because of who a human being is. But there's some things about human beings, like, could we have possibly predicted Pokemon in 1922? Like, no, it's like, there's just no way. Could we possibly have imagined what happened with, what was the one where the stock market, what's that movie? GameStop, like the GameStop, like, could you imagine like a bunch of people were just like, fuck GameStop, like, it's like, or no, love GameStop, screw the guys that are shorting it. That's just like a weird like thing that happened in humanity. So for me, I just think humans are so weird and we are so imaginative and we're so strange little beings that AI could never possibly run the show if we still have any agency.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a full circle moment and ties together what we first started talking about. And I'll end with a story that highlights why AI can't solve all the problems if the data doesn't exist. You need a human being to understand nuance, because, we built this AI to identify the perfect lead at the perfect account because of signals. And, we had all these signals coming together perfectly. And as a way to break into the account, I reached out to an AE who used to work there. And I said, hey, she used to work at this company, like a really red hot account. Can you find us a way to get in? And he responded just with that laughing emoji saying, like, you do not want to try to film this company. They're like a dumpster fire. It'll never work out. And I realized that this requires a human to understand the nuance, because without me talking to that person, just looking at the AI, I would have like doubled down and tried to like really break into this account. And now just with one phone call from one human to another, I realized I would have been wasting my time. And again, this is why I think go-to-market engineers will be obsolete for SDRs, because SDRs lean into humanity, where go-to-market engineers are leaning into technology, and technology is evolving so quickly that you're probably not going to need them.
Cool. Well, I think I always end a podcast with one question. Two questions. First one is, if you had to leave humanity with one, we've been talking about humanity a lot. So if you had to leave humanity with one message or idea or thought, it could be about reality now, it could be about just life, it could be about anything. It doesn't have to be about anything in particular. What is the message you would want to leave? Your great grandkids were listening to this. What would you want them to hear?
I would say take out your headphones, put down your phone, and go talk to a human.
Where can people find you online? Where's a good place to reach out to you?
I'm pretty accessible on LinkedIn. Richard F. Purcell, founder of Moxie GTM.
Great. Well, everyone, there's going to be some show note links. Go check him out. Really appreciate you being on, of course. And if you guys have any other questions, you guys know where to find me. I will see you guys on the next episode of the Next Gen Sales Leader podcast. Signing out.